I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio .world. This is our special impacts of the coronavirus on Seattle and surrounding communities. I just gave you information a little earlier, again, on something that's not well known, and we'll see how it pans out, and that is MIS-A, multi-inflammatory symptoms in adults. And yeah, we talked about that. Now we're going to move on to another area, but I can't emphasize enough that you might want to pay attention to this because we are finding out that it is impacting disproportionately African Americans and Hispanics. And just like the coronavirus initially, we're being told this information. This is a new virus. It's very new, hasn't even been a year yet, so we don't know the impact that it's going to have on humans. And again, with MIS-A, you could have been asymptomatic and even tested negative for COVID. You would have need to get tested for the antibodies to find out that this is what you're experiencing, and it is deadly. I'm going to be talking about the King County International Airport. Boeing Field wants your input to shape the future of the airport, and there'll be some opportunities for you to have feedback to find out about this. And it's primarily, used for commercial, cargo, private aircraft. But we're going to have a conversation about this today because it is another airport. You probably think of SeaTac, but there is the King County International Airport at Boeing Field. I got a couple folks joining me. One of them is Mr. John Parrott, who is the director. John, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity this afternoon.
And John, I'm just going to share a bit of background information on you. John has 4 decades of experience in the aviation industry, served as the director of King County International Airport, Boeing Field, since January of 2019. John also worked at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport in Alaska for nearly 20 years, including 9 years as director, and most recently managed his own aviation consulting business. Also joining us is Barbara Ramey. Barbara, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you again for this opportunity. We really appreciate it.
And Barbara is the Deputy Communications Manager, and Barbara has nearly 3 decades of professional communications experience in government, nonprofit, the private sectors, and has served as Deputy Communications Manager of King County Department of Executive Services since April of 2019. She has experience in media relations, crisis communications, well, that's where we're at, employee communications, community relations, and social media. And we're going to get into this, but I'll just ask you both very quickly. Barbara, since I just brought it up, with your experience in crisis communications, were you prepared, or could you have possibly have been prepared for what we were about to experience in 2020 with the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, I'm not sure that anyone could be prepared, and I really want to defer to John, hoping that we keep most of the focus of this conversation on the airport. But I will say that King County, within the Department of Executive Services, we also have the emergency management, and that department that division has regional plans. They have all hazards plans, and they have a system for responding to any kind of emergency. In terms of COVID, public health really has been the lead, but emergency management has been supporting them all along. And I would just say that if you have to be dealing with this coronavirus anywhere in the world, King County is one of the best places to be.
All right, and I just brought that up because, again, when you talk about crisis communication, nobody saw this coming, and then you try to prepare as well as you can. John, same question for you, though. When you took this position, you couldn't possibly have, or maybe you could have, anticipated what would be happening in 2020. What was that like for you?
Well, it's certainly new territory for not only King County International Airport, but airports all over the world. Having said that, unfortunately, airports generally have a plan, a general plan for crisis communications, because an aircraft incident, the events of 9/11, the SARS concern, the various infectious diseases, airports are always kind of at the forefront of that. So airports have emergency plans. We obviously didn't have one for coronavirus, and this has gone on much longer and is much more impactful than most of those. But we at least had a place to start. I will say I got here in January of 2019 and was greeted by Snowmageddon. So having incidents that impact the airport is not unusual. This one is certainly more serious and longer lasting than most.
I talked just very briefly about the King County International Airport Boeing Field. Can you give a bigger overview of who uses the airport, folks who may not even be aware that it exists when I'm saying King County International Airport? Just give us a big background about King County International Airport.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. We're one of the most important and busiest airports. Nobody really knows where it is. We're that place south of town as you drive on Interstate 5 that you look over and wonder what that little airport is. One of our biggest tenants, obviously, is the Boeing Aircraft Company. All the 737s that get delivered to any carrier in the world fly out of Boeing Field when that airline takes delivery of them. That's our major tenant. We also have a very significant United Parcel Service, or UPS, operation with a number of aircraft coming in every day to pick up and deliver goods for the Seattle area. We have 3 fixed base operators. Those are folks that service corporate and small aircraft that come in. Seattle is obviously a hub of economic activity, and many of those folks that come into to visit Seattle come into our airport. We're also where most of the sports teams come in and depart from, whether for college or professional sports. Those fixed base operators handle them. We have a number of private hangars for corporate aircraft. A number of firms that would not be a surprise. The top companies that have headquarters or significant operations in Seattle have hangars at our airfield. And then we have several hundred small privately owned aircraft, as well as a helicopter training and flight seeing operations and fixed wing flight training operations. So we have everything from 1950s era small aircraft to currently 4 of the 777Xs, the newest aircraft that Boeing has produced, all operating out of our airport. It's a very diverse group, and keeping them and the surrounding community engaged and happy is a full-time job.
And you can catch a plane to. Go ahead.
I also wanted to add that while the airport has a very small staff, currently about 50 full-time employees, the airport's existence facilitates about 16,000 jobs and contributes about $3 billion to the local economy. So we're not a giant, but we are a significant economic engine that the county operates.
Was that 16,000? Is that what you said?
Yes.
16,000. Okay. What I was just going to add is this. I remember catching a flight to Yakima out of King County International Airport. So do you also service some of the areas in Washington as well?
We do have a small passenger operation. Kenmore Air flies, I believe, now to the islands out of Boeing Field for a while. Starting earlier, Jet Suite X, now called JSX, has and is operating out of Boeing Field. They've currently suspended their operations. they had flights initially to Oakland, more recently to Vegas, and we'll see where those flights go when they resume service, which is their intent.
All right, thank you, John. And we're going to talk a little bit later about the opportunity for community members to shape the future of King County International Airport. And so that wonderful explanation you gave is certainly going to help folks in understanding where King County International Airport Boeing Field sits in the landscape of all of this. But I've got to ask you this big question now that we know a little bit more about you and the airport, what it does. I know it's a big question, but how was the King County International Airport impacted by the coronavirus? We had nationally, we saw what was happening at the larger airports and the bigger airports. What happened at King County International Airport when this thing got underway? Were you locked down? Were you shut down at all? Just let us know.
Certainly. Well, there were a number of impacts, and if I could have the latitude, I'll go through a number of areas where we were impacted.
Sure.
One of them was as you've discussed, the Airport Master Plan. An important part of an Airport Master Plan is the public involvement. An airport is supposed to do a master plan every 5 to 7 years. It's a 20-year look into the future to see what the demand on the airport will be and how the airport can meet that demand. And as we were getting toward the end of that planning effort, COVID hit. And so our ability to have public meetings and get public input has been severely limited over the last 9 months or so. In order to work around that and still fulfill a very important obligation to get public input, we've reached out to 10 or 11 community-based organizations. We have information on our website, both documents and videos describing where we are and what we're proposing in the master plan. And later this month, on the 28th of October, we're going to hold 3 virtual public meetings at 8 in the morning, at noon, and at 6 p.m. Not only do we have the information, some of the information on the website translated into 11 different languages, but we're also going to have translation capability at those meetings for Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. So developing a virtual public involvement program has been one of the significant impacts of COVID, and we recognize that not everyone wants to participate in a public meeting, certainly not now. We recognize that some folks are not either able or willing to participate necessarily directly in a virtual meeting. So that's why we're also continuing the interaction and collaboration with the community-based organizations to make sure that people who often either don't have or get the opportunity to help comment and guide in airports development are able to participate in this process. But that's been a very large effort by a number of the staff to try to find a way to involve the public when we can't directly interact with the public. Mm-hmm. Some of the other impacts of go ahead.
No, go ahead. Just keep going.
Okay.
Your floor.
Okay.
Right now.
Some of the other impacts, obviously, our employees are a big concern. Very early in March, the county executive issued a work from home order, and that basically stated that if you didn't have to physically be at the airport to do your job, you were to work from home. That was a huge transition. As you can imagine, most folks don't necessarily have a home office with all the capability that they have at work. But we found our employees were very ingenious, very entrepreneurial. We are able to supply some equipment from offices to allow them to work from home. And we believe that by and large, the service level has not been degraded, even though about half of our workers no longer show up at the airport every day. I do want to assure folks that those who need to be there, such as the aircraft rescue firefighters, the airport maintenance staff, and airport operations, are there each and every day to make sure that the airport is operating safely and in a compliant manner. But it has been a very different way of operating than we've ever seen before.
I do want to ask you about
the more visible things.
John,
certainly.
I do want to ask you about again, and let you continue there. Did you have to lay anyone off, or was everyone able to keep their jobs?
No layoffs at all. In fact, going forward, looking at the next biennial budget, we're hoping to increase our staff to help us move toward a vision of a world-class airport by 2030. So we're in a very unusual situation. Most of the airports that have had to react to COVID have lost passenger traffic. Since our revenue stream and our business model is based primarily on land rent from our tenants, we've had a small negative impact from COVID, but our revenue stream has remained very stable. We do not use general fund money. We're an enterprise fund, so we have to generate our own money to use for our payroll and projects, and we've been able to continue doing that. So from an economic standpoint, your King County International Airport has survived this pandemic very well because of a very unique business model.
Okay, now I've got questions to ask you, but you were about to say something when I interrupted you. Did you want to continue on with that?
Well, I was going to talk about some of the things we've done in the terminal. So would you like to ask the questions, or would you like to move on?
We're on the same page. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, folks that do happen to go to the terminal will may see a number of changes, and some might not be that obvious. We almost immediately started a move toward making the terminal touchless, meaning that trying to, although we clean the high touch surfaces like the door handles very often, we wanted to make it so that people didn't have to pull on the front door handle. Didn't have to touch faucets in the restrooms, and could do things with touchless sensors. We've got that on the front door. We've got that those devices in the restrooms. In addition, at the ticket counters and the little cafe, we've installed sneeze guards, and we have social distancing reminders. And for folks that are visiting our offices, we do have masks available if they don't have their own. Those were some of the things that obviously any public-facing organization needed to do fairly quickly. We've followed that up. We're currently pursuing a GBAC Star certification. That's the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, in collaboration with the American Association of Airport Executives, has a program where a facility can go through a number of steps and checklists and verify that they are in fact a sanitary, disinfected, safe facility for folks to be in. We're in the well into the starting of that certification, and while that doesn't change many of our procedures, it does allow us to ensure folks that it's not just us saying we're doing the right thing, but we're meeting a third party's certification for being a safe place. More recently, the governor came out with a directive for commercial airports. It reiterated many of the steps that we had already taken, and so we are in compliance with the governor's directive for commercial airports. And even though we have a small passenger terminal and a small passenger customer base, that's still a very important thing that we need to make sure the public that comes into the terminal is safe and knows that they're safe. The other things that we've done on site, which folks won't see, is that for the folks that are at work, the aircraft rescue firefighters, the maintenance folks, and the operations folks, we have made available hand sanitizers in the terminal for the public as well as for the employees. We have disinfecting wipes. We make sure the vehicles are cleaned. We provide masks and other personal protective equipment as needed, because we have to take care of our workers just as well as taking care of the public.
Wow, John, you know what? For a coronavirus impact interview, you are perfect because all I want to do is ask questions. I want to get information out, and you do an excellent job at that. Um, have you had any instances of coronavirus that you've had to deal with at the King County International Airport, and if so, what was done and what was the response and reaction?
Well, as Barbara said earlier, if you have to be in an area that's dealing with coronavirus, King County is an excellent place to be. Certainly for employees, there's a coronavirus leave bank which is available. We have had some employees that have tested positive for coronavirus. We've had some become ill, and we've had some that are simply have been exposed. And in any of those cases, the first step is for the employee to stay out of or leave the workplace, go home, quarantine, get tested. If they test negative, they can come back to work. If their status is uncertain, or if they test positive, then there's a quarantine period in accordance with the public health guidelines. It has been relatively few employees and hasn't had a significant impact on our operation. But we do want to make sure, and we are making sure, that we're taking care of our employees if they're exposed or test positive.
All right, I want to move on here and get back to not move on, but just talk about the future of the King County International Airport. If you have just joined me, you're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. You know this is our regular Friday programming, impacts of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. John, earlier I was talking about something fairly new. We know the coronavirus is a very new virus, hasn't even been a year yet. We don't know all of the implications of catching it, how you catch it, what happens after you have the virus. And now they have this thing called MISA. Are you familiar with that? They're sharing that with doctors. And basically what it's telling people is that you can have symptoms, but not the respiratory systems. You'll have maybe a rash, pink eye. Again, you might be having some different heart issues. You might have a fever, but nothing impacting your breathing. And if you get tested for coronavirus, it's more than likely going to be negative because it means you've been asymptomatic. You may have had it 2 to 6 weeks ago, and this is one of the after effects, and it's deadly. And they're figuring this out now. I mean, the study was done October 1st. And we also know that just like the coronavirus, it's disproportionately impacting African Americans and Hispanics. There's not enough information to know if those are the same disparities that are causing this to happen or if it has something to do with genetics. So I'll just share that with you. The future of the King County International Airport. You talked about the master plan. Let's talk about that a little bit. What does a master plan, 20-year master plan for an international airport look like? What does that consist of? If you're a person out there saying, hey, I get to help shape this, well, what does it mean?
Well, a master plan is an interesting effort. As you can imagine, looking 20 years into the future, most crystal balls get a little fuzzy that far out, and so that's why the FAA recommends that airports update them every 5 to 7 years. The only thing I can absolutely guarantee you about a master plan is that it will not be executed as it's written, because things will change, and that's why the plan gets updated. But the FAA works with the airport and a consultant and comes up with a forecast for the best guess for how many and what kinds of airplanes will want to use the airport in the future and what kind of operations those will be. And then you look at the airport and try to determine how can the airport develop the capacity to meet that demand. And it's a bit of a guessing game. And with technology these days, as I said, it will change. But I'll give you a couple examples that have occurred recently that will probably be considered much more in our next master plan than in this one, because this one started about 4 or 5 years ago. Recently, developments in electric aircraft and hydrogen fuel cell aircraft are coming to the front. So my guess is that for the airport's next master plan, we'll be looking very heavily into how to ensure the airport has the infrastructure necessary to support fuels other than the current fossil fuels. We're already looking at a new fuel farm at the airport, and one of the requirements for that will be that it has the capacity to handle sustainable biofuels. But even as we look at that, new fuel potentials are coming out and being developed. So it's a constantly evolving program. Our airport is space constrained. We have a little over 600 acres, and that doesn't leave a lot of room. We're looking at properties that may be available off airport currently that could be used for non-aeronautical operations, such as cargo transferring. So we also want to look at property that protects the airport and its airspace. We don't want someone building a tall building off the end of the runway. So we want to make sure that we control what we can to protect our instrument approaches and our departures. And then there's a fair amount of the master plan that is relatively internal to the airport. We have some taxiways that are too close together to be really effective. So we'll probably remove some of those. We have some taxiways that are no longer at an appropriate angle to the runway. So we may have one that's at a 45-degree angle, and we're going to change it to a perpendicular taxiway. A fair amount of stuff that really won't impact or be of much interest, I don't think, to folks that aren't in the airport business.
Well, John, this is great information. Again, that's Wednesday, October 28th. 8 o'clock, noon, and 6 o'clock. And these are opportunities for the community to engage, find out more information. Really appreciate you being here, John, and sharing all this information with us.
Can I put in?
Certainly.
Oops,
I was going to say I'd ask folks to go to the website so that you can register for the Zoom meetings. Mm-hmm. We're trying to make sure we have enough capacity. So please go to the website, preview the documents so that you have an idea of what we're going to talk about, because as you can tell, it's a lot of information the first time you hear it.
All right. Thanks again for joining us. And Barbara, was there something you wanted to say really quickly?
John read my mind. I was just going to say that website is kingcounty.gov/KCIAMasterPlan.
All right. And don't forget that later on tonight, 5 o'clock, we'll be doing our Supreme Court Justice Position 3 candidate debate. You hear a lot about the big one that's taking place. During this election, you have the opportunity to vote for your Supreme Court Justice. That's Judge David Larson, who is the challenger and candidate, and the incumbent and candidate is Justice Raquel Montoya Lewis. That's from 5 to 6 tonight, right here on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. And on Monday, Shikundi Salisbury and Kirsten Harris Talley, both position 2, 37th District State Representative. We'll have that debate. And then on Tuesday, the Black Candidate Forum for Snohomish County candidates who are African American will be sharing their platform. And then on Thursday, it will be the Lieutenant Governor debate that will be taking place. So a lot of debates taking place here during this electoral season. We'll continue to provide you information on the coronavirus. We've got more coming up, actually. We'll be back, and thanks again to our guests. We'll be back in about a couple minutes here on Rainier Avenue Radio.world with more coronavirus info.